In a quiet corner of the galaxy, far away from the shining royal cities and crowded trading stations, there was a small human outpost. It was not fancy or famous. It was a place where people worked with their hands, fixed broken ships, and lived simple lives. Among those people was Jax, a human mechanic. He was tall, quiet, and always covered with a little grease from working on engines all day. He liked his peaceful routine. He fixed ships, shared a cup of warm tea with the other workers, and watched the stars every night from the roof of his workshop. He never imagined that something extraordinary would enter his quiet life. One warm afternoon, everything changed. A huge royal starship appeared in the sky. It was larger than any vessel the outpost had ever seen. Its silver hull shined under the twin suns. The people working outside stopped what they were doing. Some stared, some whispered, and some even laughed nervously. Everyone knew this kind of ship belonged to someone powerful. Someone from the royal families of the alien empire. No such ship ever came to a small human station like this. The royal ship landed slowly, sending a soft wind through the dusty ground. Soldiers in golden armor stepped down first, forming two straight lines. Behind them, a few tall alien officials followed. They wore long dark robes and carried expressions that looked almost amused, as if this place was beneath them. And then she appeared. A young alien woman with pale blue skin, silver eyes, and hair that flowed like soft silk. She walked slowly, her steps light but steady. She wore no crown, no jewels, nothing that showed royal power. Yet everyone could tell she was someone important. Jack stood near the hangar doors with his tool bag still in his hand. He had never seen anyone like her. She looked calm, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. The kind of sadness that comes from being alone for a long time. The officials laughed quietly among themselves as they spoke to the station commander. "She is here for placement," one official said, almost like throwing away an unwanted package. The Emperor thought it would be entertaining to let her live here. The word spread quickly. People whispered in corners. "She's the unwanted daughter," one worker said softly. "The Emperor doesn't care about her. This is a joke to him." Another worker replied, "Why send her here? We're just a repair station." Jax didn't join the whispers. He just watched her. The young woman didn't look like a joke. She looked lost. She held her hands together in front of her, her head slightly lowered, not because she was weak, but because she didn't know where she belonged. That quiet, lonely posture made something shift inside Jax's chest. He didn't even understand why, but he couldn't look away. The station commander tried to protest. "This isn't a palace," he told the officials. "We fix engines here. We don't host royals." The alien officials only smiled in a cold way. "Perfect," one of them said. "She doesn't need anything special." They turned around and left her standing alone in the dusty sunlight. The royal ship rose into the air and disappeared into the sky, leaving behind silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. The young woman stood at the edge of the landing pad, her silver eyes watching the sky that had just taken her old life away. The workers didn't know what to do. Some avoided looking at her. Some just went back to work, pretending nothing had happened. But Jack stayed. He saw how small her suitcase was. Just one little bag for someone from a palace. He saw how she slowly took a deep breath as if trying not to break. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stood there, strong in her silence. Finally, the commander sighed. "We'll give her a room in the back," he said to the others. "But nobody gets special treatment. This is a working station." "She doesn't look like the type who needs it," one mechanic whispered. Jax walked away at first, heading back to his workshop. But his mind wasn't calm. He kept remembering her face, the way she looked at the sky, the way everyone turned away from her. He told himself it wasn't his business. He was just a mechanic. But something inside his heart didn't agree. That evening, as the suns went down and the stars slowly filled the black sky, Jax walked to the small room behind the hangar, where the commander had placed her. It was a simple metal room, no luxury, just a bed, a table, and a dim light. The door was slightly open. He saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her knees. She wasn't crying. She was just quiet, like someone who had spent a long time learning to hide her pain. He knocked gently on the metal frame. She turned her head, her silver eyes meeting his brown ones. For a second, neither spoke. Then Jax cleared his throat awkwardly. "I brought you some food," he said. He held out a small lunchbox from the kitchen. It wasn't anything special, just rice and vegetables, but it was warm. She looked at the box for a moment, then back at him. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was calm, smooth, and carried an accent from a faraway star. She reached out and took it with both hands like it was something precious. Jax nodded, trying to act casual. "It's not palace food," he said with a small awkward smile. "But it's good." Something like a tiny smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "It's perfect," she replied. He wanted to say more, but he didn't know how. He had never talked to someone from a royal family, and she didn't seem like one anyway. She seemed human, not in body, but in the way she carried her quiet heart. So he just said, "I'm Jax. I fix things here." "Lyra," she answered. "I fix things too." That surprised him. She didn't speak like someone who grew up in silk halls. She spoke like someone who understood work. And in that one small moment, something invisible connected them. Not big or loud, just a quiet thread. As Jax walked back to his workshop that night, the stars looked a little different. The outpost felt less quiet, less ordinary. He didn't know it yet, but the girl who arrived as a cruel joke would change everything in his life. While the rest of the workers laughed behind closed doors or ignored her presence, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in the shadows. She wasn't a burden or a joke. She was someone trying to find a place where she could just exist, without being treated like a mistake. And deep in his chest, without understanding why, Jax decided that maybe she would find that place here, not because of fate, but because he would not let her face the stars alone. The next few days after Lyra's arrival were quiet on the surface, but inside the outpost, everything felt different. People talked in low voices whenever she passed. Some were curious, some were cold, and some thought it was just a strange story to laugh at. A royal princess sent away to a dusty human mechanic station. Nobody really believed she would last long in a place like this. Lyra didn't speak much. She woke up early every morning, walked around the outpost, and carefully observed everything. She looked at the engines, the power lines, the dusty old tools in the workshop. Most people expected her to complain or demand comfort, but she didn't. She was quiet, watching, learning, and breathing in a world completely different from the one she came from. Jax saw her a few times during those early mornings. He always arrived before sunrise to fix broken parts before the workday started. One morning, he found her sitting on a stack of cargo boxes, watching the first rays of light touch the hangar floor. She looked calm but far away, like someone who didn't quite belong yet was trying to. "You're up early," Jax said, placing his tool bag down on the floor. Lyra turned her head, her silver eyes soft. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "The engines here make a sound I've never heard before. It's peaceful." Jax chuckled lightly. "Peaceful? That's a new word for these engines." She tilted her head a little, curious. "On my home world, everything is polished and silent. No one allows a single sound out of place. Here, everything hums. It feels alive." That was the first real conversation they had. It wasn't deep or dramatic. It was quiet, gentle, like two people slowly building a bridge between different worlds. And for Jax, it felt surprisingly easy to talk to her. Later that morning, the main power unit in the north section failed again. It was old and temperamental, always breaking down at the worst times. Jax grabbed his tools and headed over to fix it, only to find Lyra already standing there. "What are you doing here?" he asked, a little surprised. She pointed at the panel. "It's overheating because the cooling system isn't aligned with the power flow. Whoever fixed it last time didn't balance it correctly." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You know that just by looking at it?" Lyra knelt down and gently placed her hand on the warm metal. "I studied engine design in the Royal Academies, but I never got to touch the machines myself. Only the best students were allowed to work on real engines. I wasn't one of them." Without waiting for permission, she opened the panel with calm hands. Her fingers moved like someone who had always belonged around machines, even if no one had ever allowed her to. Jax watched her work for a moment, impressed by how she noticed details he often missed. He crouched beside her. "Here," he said, handing her the correct tool. "This will make it easier." She took it carefully, their fingers brushing for just a second. Then together, they fixed the unit faster than Jax had ever done alone. When the lights above them blinked back on, a soft cheer rose from the nearby workers. "She fixed it?" one of them asked in surprise. "Looks like it," Jax answered, half smiling. Lyra didn't ask for praise. She just stood up, brushed the dust from her hands, and quietly stepped aside. But Jax noticed something, a tiny spark in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had finally done something that mattered. As the days passed, Lyra spent more and more time in the workshop. She asked Jax questions about human tools, about the way they built their ships, about why they fixed things the way they did. And she didn't just ask, she tried. Her hands grew steady, her eyes sharp. She began to repair small parts on her own. At first, the other mechanics ignored her, but after she fixed 3 cooling fans in half the usual time, people began to notice. A few workers started asking her for help quietly, pretending it was no big deal. But Jax saw the way their tone changed. They no longer saw her as just a royal outsider. She was slowly becoming part of the station. One afternoon, while Jax was under the wing of an old cargo ship, Lyra climbed up the ladder and handed him a new spanner without him asking. He looked up and laughed. "You're reading my mind now?" She smiled slightly. "No, I just pay attention." He liked that about her. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just worked, quietly and carefully, like someone trying to build a new home without asking permission. But not everyone welcomed her. A few workers didn't trust her. "She doesn't belong here," one man muttered. "She's royalty. She'll leave us when she gets bored." Others whispered that she was just part of the Emperor's joke, a reminder that humans were seen as small and unimportant. Jax hated those whispers. He saw what they didn't, how hard she tried to fit in, how she learned faster than anyone he had ever met, how she fixed things not for praise but because it made her feel alive. One night, as the stars stretched across the black sky, Jax found her sitting alone near the power lines. He sat down beside her without a word. They both watched the blinking lights in silence. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "You don't have to work this hard to prove anything to us." Lyra looked at the stars. "I'm not doing it for them," she said softly. "All my life I was told I was not enough. Not strong enough. Not clever enough. Not royal enough. I want to prove it to myself now. That I can build something, fix something, be something." Jax didn't say anything for a moment, but inside something warm grew in his chest. He understood that feeling, wanting to prove your worth in a world that never looked your way. The next day, a trader ship landed with a group of visitors from nearby stations. Word had already spread about the unwanted daughter working with humans. Some came just to see her. They stood near the hangar doors whispering, laughing quietly as if she were an exhibit. Lyra felt their eyes on her. She kept working, trying to ignore them, but her hands trembled just a little. Jax noticed. He walked over, stood beside her, and pretended to help her with the engine. But in truth, he was just making sure she wasn't standing alone. When one of the visitors made a rude joke about her, Jax turned his gaze toward them. He didn't speak. But his calm, solid presence was enough to make them step back. That moment changed something small but important. Lyra glanced at him and for the first time truly smiled, not out of politeness but with a spark of trust. The girl who once stood alone at the landing pad was slowly building a new rhythm in a strange place. She fixed engines, shared tea with mechanics, and sat under the stars with a man who saw her for who she really was. The Emperor might have sent her away as a joke. But in this little corner of the galaxy, Lyra was no one's joke. The outpost had grown used to seeing Lyra move through the hangars with quiet purpose. She was no longer just the unwanted daughter. She was part of the daily rhythm, fixing, learning, building. But with her growing presence came something she could not control, attention from far away. News had spread across nearby stations. Whispers traveled through trade ships like wind through dry grass. People called it the Emperor's joke. Some laughed, some doubted, and some came to see it for themselves. It began one cool morning. The sky above the outpost glowed pale gold as the first sunlight touched the dusty ground. Jax and Lyra were working together on a cargo ship that had come in during the night. The ship's main drive was badly damaged, but Lyra was focused, her hands steady as she adjusted the power coils. Jax handed her tools without words now. They had built a silent understanding. She would look and he would know what she needed. But their calm was broken by the sound of a large ship descending. It was not a regular cargo vessel. The ship was sleek, polished, and carried the golden crest of the Emperor's court. Everyone in the outpost stopped working. It wasn't just a visit, it was a royal envoy. Lyra froze for a moment, her hand tightening around the wrench. She knew that crest. Those were the people who had left her here like a piece of unwanted furniture. The envoy landed at the edge of the hangar. A group of alien officials stepped down with their heads held high and mocking smiles on their faces. Behind them came a few traders from nearby stations who had followed the ship just to watch the entertainment. Jack saw the way Lyra lowered her gaze, trying to hide the pain in her chest. She had built a small piece of peace here, and now those who had abandoned her were stepping into it like they owned the ground beneath her feet. "Princess Lyra," one of the officials said loudly, his voice sharp. "What a fitting place for you, surrounded by rust and broken ships. It suits you." A few traders chuckled quietly. The workers in the hangar fell silent. Jax clenched his jaw. He wanted to say something, but he knew Lyra needed to stand on her own feet. Lyra straightened slowly. Her hands were still dusty with engine grease, and her work clothes were simple. She didn't look like a princess. She looked like a worker. But her silver eyes met the envoy's gaze without trembling. "I like it here," she said softly but clearly. "At least here I'm not invisible." The envoy smirked as if her words were a performance for their amusement. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he said. "This place will forget you just like your family did." Something about those words hit deep inside her. For years she had been told she was not good enough, that she was not strong enough to lead or smart enough to matter. She had tried to ignore the pain, but hearing it again from their mouths felt like a wound reopening. Jack stepped closer, his presence quiet but steady. Lyra didn't look at him, but she felt him there. And that was enough. As the officials walked around the hangar, making rude jokes and laughing, something else was happening at the outpost. A warning light flashed on the control panel. One of the generators had overloaded. The power lines in the east section began to spark. The commander rushed out shouting for help. "System's failing!" someone yelled. "If we don't fix it fast, the life support will shut down." Jax ran toward the panel. Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed her toolkit and followed. The envoy looked confused. Their entertainment was turning into real chaos. The outpost workers scrambled to control the overload. It was dangerous work. If they failed, the entire station could lose oxygen and temperature control within minutes. Jax climbed under the main control hub, sparks flying over his head. Lyra went straight to the junction box. She had studied the entire outpost layout in her free time. She knew exactly where the weak points were. Her hands moved fast. "Cut the third wire." Jax shouted over the loud alarm. "Not yet!" she replied firmly. "If you cut it now, the coolant will collapse. We need to reverse the flow first." She knelt on the floor, her silver hair sticking to her face as she worked. Her calm voice and quick instructions cut through the panic like a steady line. The workers who once doubted her began to follow her lead without question. "Do what she says," the commander shouted. Within minutes, Lyra had rerouted the energy surge through a bypass she had quietly built weeks ago during her night shifts. She had done it because she noticed the system's weakness long before anyone cared. That single decision saved the outpost. The lights flickered, then steadied. The alarm went silent. Everyone took a breath of relief. But when they turned around, they saw the envoy staring at her. She had just led a team of humans and saved the station. She wasn't a quiet, unwanted princess anymore. She was the one who had controlled the storm. One of the officials spoke with a half-smile. "Well, perhaps she's not completely useless after all." Lyra felt a mix of emotions: pain, anger, pride, and something new: strength. The traders who had come to laugh at her didn't laugh anymore. The workers who once doubted her looked at her with respect. And Jack, standing a few feet away, felt something strong inside his chest. Not pity, not surprise, pride. That evening, after the crisis ended and everything calmed down, Jax found Lyra sitting near the cooling towers, wiping the grease from her hands with an old cloth. She looked tired but peaceful. "You saved us today," Jax said quietly. Lyra shook her head. "We saved us," she corrected gently. "All of us." But Jax leaned against the wall beside her. "No," he said slowly. "You saw the danger before anyone else. You fixed it. They saw you today. Not as a joke. Not as a princess. As one of us." Lyra didn't answer right away. She stared at the fading sun. "Do you know what's strange?" she said softly. "When I lived in the palace, I was surrounded by gold, servants, and endless silence. But I never felt real, Here, with dust on my hands and old machines around me, I feel alive. Jax looked at her. She was no longer the same girl who had arrived at the landing pad weeks ago. There was light in her now, not from the stars but from within. Across the station, people whispered again. But the whispers had changed. No one called her the Emperor's joke anymore. They called her the one who saved the station. The envoy left quietly that night. They came to laugh but went away uneasy. Lyra had turned their mockery into respect. She had faced the storm, not with royal power but with skill, courage, and calm hands. Jax knew something important had happened that day. It wasn't just about fixing engines. It was about belonging. She had built her place here, not because anyone gave it to her, but because she earned it. As the night deepened, Lyra sat under the stars, listening to the soft hum of the generators she had just saved. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel unwanted. She felt needed. She felt home. The next few weeks after the power crisis were different for everyone at the outpost. Lyra was no longer treated like a stranger. People greeted her with nods, handed her tools without hesitation, and sometimes even asked for her opinion before making decisions. She had earned their respect, not through her family name, but through her actions. But her quiet victory also carried a shadow. The story of what happened spread far beyond the outpost. Traders told the tale across stations and spaceports. Some admired her strength, but others, especially those close to the royal court, whispered with discomfort. The Emperor's unwanted daughter was not supposed to shine. She was supposed to be forgotten. Yet now, her name was being spoken with something close to admiration, and that made powerful people uneasy. One bright morning, Jax found Lyra standing on the hangar roof. She was watching the sky as ships came and went. She often went up there when she needed quiet. Jax climbed the ladder to join her. The wind carried the smell of metal and oil, the familiar scent of home for him. "You're thinking again," Jax said gently, standing beside her. She smiled faintly. "I do that a lot," she said softly. "Up there, the sky always looks endless. It feels like the universe is listening." Jax tilted his head. "And what does the universe say?" She gave a small laugh, the kind that sounded soft but real. "It says, I don't belong to the palace anymore. But maybe, just maybe, I belong here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both looked out at the horizon, a mechanic and a princess who no longer wanted a crown. That peace didn't last long. One afternoon, another royal ship appeared in the sky. But this time it wasn't a laughing envoy. It was the Emperor's personal fleet. The entire outpost shook as the massive vessel descended. Dust swirled in the wind and workers ran outside, whispering nervously. "Why would the Emperor's fleet come here?" someone asked. "They never come for nothing," another replied. Lyra stood near the hangar doors, her heart pounding. She knew this day would come. When the Emperor heard that she had become more than a joke, he would act. The royal guards stepped out first, their golden armor reflecting the sunlight. Behind them came an older man with sharp features and a cold gaze, one of the Emperor's senior advisors. His presence alone made the air feel heavier. He scanned the dusty outpost with a look of quiet disapproval. "This is where you've been hiding," he said coldly when he saw Lyra. "I wasn't hiding," she replied firmly. "I was living," he smirked. "Living? Surrounded by broken engines and humans? Do you really think this is your place?" Jax, standing beside her, tightened his jaw but said nothing. He wasn't royalty, and he knew his words would mean nothing to these people. But his presence was steady like a wall behind her. The advisor stepped closer. "The Emperor sent you here because you were a problem. You were supposed to disappear quietly, but instead your name is spreading through the stations like fire, and that cannot be allowed. You will come back to the palace now." Lyra's heart pounded, but she didn't step back. She remembered the night she arrived here. The silence, the whispers, the feeling of being abandoned. But that was no longer who she was. She wasn't just a forgotten daughter anymore. She was an engineer, a part of this outpost, a woman who saved lives. "No," she said clearly. "I won't go back." The advisor's eyes narrowed. "You dare refuse your father's command?" "I dare to choose my life," she said calmly. "Here I am not a shadow. I have a name. I have a purpose. I belong here." The workers who had gathered nearby stared in silence. They had never heard anyone speak like that to royal authority. But Jax understood her. This was the moment she was no longer just living here. She was standing for herself. The advisor turned to the commander of the outpost. You will hand her over. She is the Emperor's property. The commander hesitated, glancing at Lyra. A few weeks ago he might have obeyed, but not now. She's part of my crew, he said slowly. And we don't hand over crew like broken parts. The advisor's face hardened. Then the Emperor will not be kind to this place. Before he could say more, a loud alarm suddenly rang through the outpost. Everyone froze. The advisor turned sharply. It's the main shield line, someone shouted. It's failing. The Emperor's massive ship had overloaded the local power grid just by docking. The old system wasn't built to handle so much energy. If it collapsed completely, the entire outpost could lose its atmosphere shield. That meant air leaking out, pressure dropping, and lives at risk. Everyone to the shield control, the commander yelled. Without a word, Lyra and Jax ran toward the shield room. Workers followed. Even the advisor was forced to trail behind. Inside the control room, sparks flew. Warning lights flashed red across the panels. The capacitor's melting. An engineer shouted. We can't handle this load. Jax jumped into the wiring panel while Lyra rushed to the control console. She scanned the readings, her mind racing. She had studied this system carefully over the past months. We can bypass the overload, she said. But we have to disconnect the Emperor's ship power feed first. The advisor's voice echoed sharply. You will not disconnect the royal ship. Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes burning with determination. If we don't, everyone here will die. Even you. The room fell silent for a second. Then the commander barked, Do it, Lyra! Her hands flew over the panel, fast and sure. Jax crawled under the wires, sealing broken connections with a welding tool. The entire outpost rumbled as the shield struggled to hold. Ready? Jax shouted. Now! Lyra yelled. She pulled the final lever and the connection to the royal ship snapped. Instantly, the overload dropped and the shield stabilized. The red warning light slowly faded to green. Everyone in the room let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding. The advisor stared at her with disbelief. Lyra stood tall, grease on her face, hands steady. I saved your life, she said quietly. So don't tell me I don't belong here. Jax stood beside her, breathing hard but proud. The workers around them started clapping. Not loud at first, but slowly growing stronger. This wasn't just applause for saving the outpost. It was for standing up to a power that had always tried to silence her. The advisor, unable to argue, finally said, The Emperor will not be pleased. Lyra met his gaze. The Emperor sent me here as a joke, but I became something more. That's his problem, not mine. He left with cold silence, the royal guards following him back to the ship. But this time Lyra didn't watch them with fear or sadness. She stood firm, surrounded by the people who believed in her. As the sun set and the stars filled the sky, Jax and Lyra stood on the hangar roof again. The wind was cool and the outpost lights glimmered softly below. You could have gone, Jax said quietly. Lyra smiled. And leave all this behind? She replied. No, I found my place. The girl who once arrived alone, unwanted, had stood before royal power and chosen her own destiny. The outpost was no longer just a dusty repair station. It was her home, and she was no longer a forgotten daughter. She was a name spoken with respect. The outpost returned to its quiet rhythm after the royal fleet left, but something important had changed. Everyone could feel it in the air. Lyra was no longer just a guest or an outsider. She was now someone who had stood against the Emperor's power and still held her ground. The workers who once whispered about her behind her back now spoke her name with pride. When they walked past her, they nodded with respect. When she spoke, they listened. Jax noticed this change most of all. Every morning when the sun rose above the dusty station, Lyra would already be at work. She would check the energy lines, inspect the engines, and help train the new workers. People naturally followed her lead. She never gave loud orders, never acted like a princess. She led with quiet strength. One morning, Jax found her sitting cross-legged near the east wall of the hangar, surrounded by 3 young mechanics. She was explaining how to stabilize power coils using scrap parts. Her voice was patient, and her hands moved gracefully as she showed them how to connect each wire. See, she said softly. Machines aren't just metal. They have their own rhythm. If you listen carefully, they'll tell you what they need. The young workers stared at her with full attention. They had never heard anyone speak about engines like that. She made hard work sound like art. When she noticed Jax watching her, she gave him a small smile. It wasn't the shy, uncertain smile from the day she arrived. It was steady, full of quiet confidence. Later that day, the commander gathered everyone in the mess hall. "I've been talking with the Council of Stations," he said. "They want to recognize this outpost officially as a key repair hub for the border fleet, and they want Lyra to serve as our chief engineer." The workers cheered. It wasn't a surprise. After everything she had done, saving the power grid, standing against the Emperor's advisor, earning everyone's trust, she had already been their leader in practice. Now it would be official. Lyra stood up slowly, her heart pounding. She wasn't used to applause or being at the center of attention. In the palace, no one had ever clapped for her. No one had ever cared about what she did or said. But here, every face in the room was looking at her with genuine respect. "I don't know what to say," she began quietly. "When I came here, I thought I was being thrown away. I thought this place would forget me. But you didn't. You gave me work. You gave me trust. You gave me a place where I could be more than a name. So if you'll have me, I'll keep building with you, not above you, but with you." The cheering grew louder. Jack stood in the corner, clapping with everyone else, his chest warm with pride. He remembered the girl who had arrived alone and silent, standing on the landing pad with a small suitcase and a heart full of pain. Now she was standing tall in front of everyone, her voice strong. Not long after, the outpost began to change. More ships came for repairs. More workers arrived. The station grew brighter, busier, more alive. And at the center of it all was Lyra, not as a symbol of royalty, but as someone who helped build everything with her own hands. One night, when most of the workers had gone to sleep, Jax and Lyra sat on top of the hangar roof. The stars stretched across the black sky like diamonds scattered on velvet. A soft breeze brushed against their faces. Jax looked at her and smiled. "Remember the day you arrived?" he asked quietly. Lyra laughed gently. "Yes," she said. "You were standing near the hangar door with grease on your face. I thought you looked like someone who'd rather fix a ship than talk to a princess." He chuckled. "I was, but you didn't act like a princess." She tilted her head slightly. "I guess I stopped being one the day they sent me away, and now I'm something else." Jax looked at her for a long moment. "No, you didn't stop being. You started becoming." For a few seconds they didn't speak. They just sat there, listening to the soft hum of the station and watching a distant ship pass across the stars. Lyra felt something she had never felt in the palace. A calm warmth, a feeling of belonging so deep it didn't need words. A few months later, a formal message came from the royal palace. It wasn't a command this time. It was a request. The Emperor wanted to send technicians to learn from the outpost's new systems. They wanted her guidance. The commander read the message out loud during the meeting. Everyone turned to Lyra. It was strange and powerful. The Emperor, who once sent her away as a joke, was now asking for help. Lyra thought about it carefully. She could have refused out of anger. She could have reminded them how they abandoned her. But she had changed. She was no longer someone who carried pain in silence. She had grown stronger, not harder. She nodded slowly. "If they want to learn," she said softly, "we'll teach them. But on our terms. Not as their shadow, as their equal." The workers nodded in agreement. For the first time, Lyra's voice didn't just speak for herself. It spoke for everyone in the outpost. That night after the meeting, Lyra walked alone to the landing pad where her story had begun. The same dusty ground, the same stars above. She remembered how it felt to step off the royal ship, abandoned, unwanted, small. But now, when she stood there, she wasn't alone. Behind her, the outpost lights glowed warmly. She could hear laughter from the mess hall, the distant sound of welding sparks, the steady heartbeat of the place she now called home. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the cool air touch her face. This was her life now, not because someone gave it to her, but because she built it piece by piece with her own hands. She had turned a cruel joke into something beautiful. Jax found her standing there and quietly walked up beside her. "You're thinking again," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars. "I'm remembering," she whispered. "This is where everything started. The moment I stepped off that ship, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." He looked at her, his heart full. "Lyra," he said, "this place isn't the same without you. You changed everything." She shook her head gently. "No, we changed everything." The wind blew softly between them. It wasn't loud or dramatic, It was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds peace inside it. They didn't need to say more. The stars above them spoke enough. Years later, people who came to the outpost didn't talk about the Emperor's unwanted daughter. They talked about the brilliant engineer who built the strongest repair hub on the border. They spoke about her calm leadership, her kindness, her courage. And when they mentioned her name, they spoke it with respect, not pity. Jax never forgot the first day he saw her, standing small and alone. And Lyra never forgot the man who looked at her not as a royal joke, but as a person. Her story didn't end with a crown. It ended with something far greater, a life she chose for herself. A home built not from gold but from trust, hard work, and love that grew slowly and quietly, like a sunrise after a long night. The Emperor had sent her away as a joke. But in the end, she became everything she was always meant to be,